Everybody, welcome to season 2 of the Hope is Not a Plan podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Pinnell, and on this first episode of season 2, How to Fight the Scope Creep Monster, I'm going to talk about just that. Scope is one of the big four, right? Scope, schedule, cost, quality. Some say big three. I add quality always. And scope is the thing that says, what are we going to do? What are we not going to do? And there's a couple of schools of thought. There's an old school and there's a new school, and I'll touch on those. I'll touch on the problems people think about with scope, the hopes that they have, and the plans. But before I get into that, let's hear more about the show. Welcome to the Hope is Not a Plan podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Pinnell, and here we'll explore the strategies, mindsets, and tools needed to transform aspirations into achievable goals. Whether you want to overcome personal challenges, build a successful business, or create a better world, Hope is Not a Plan has you covered. Now let's get into this episode.
3, 2, 1.
Welcome back, everybody. How to fight the scope creep monster. So the problem, or two problems, problem 1A and 1B, I'll say, is uncontrolled scope, right, is an expansion that leads to delays and budget overruns and team burnout. The second thing is that the problem we see with scope is that it's set so early, the team doesn't have a chance to truly understand if it's right for the resources and the level of effort once we get into the work. And that's easy to do because ahead of time, you've got to set your budget, you've got to plan out your resources for the year. But sometimes we do that and we're too rigid. The hope a lot of people have with these issues is believing that additional features or expansion or requests rather will ultimately improve the project's value, but it doesn't always. Sometimes it's just, oh, what about this? And I saw this cool thing and let's add it. And sometimes that's a problem, right? The other hope is that we can add or remove scope items anytime during the project, the sprint, or the effort, and it's no big deal. But it is a big deal, and that's one thing we're going to talk about with the plan portion. So we've got problems, we've got hopes. Now let's get into those plans that are going to help us be actionable and fight this scope creep monster. So we're going to define and communicate the clear scope from the outset, right? We're going to do this thing. Here's why we're going to do it. Here's what we're not going to do. This can be done very easily in different formats of like a project charter or a business case early on. And it should be confirmed, right, with the business we're doing this with. So I'm in technology, I'm in healthcare. So with our clinical folks, with our business folks, we need to make sure, is this truly what done looks like to you? Is this really what we want to get done? And make sure it's clear. So in each of these three bullets, I'm going to talk about the old school and the new school. In the old school, again, we do this months ahead of time, sometimes years, to say, here's the project we're going to do, here's why we're going to do it. And then we're very rigid and we don't change it. Or we say we have to do change control in this, and that's all good stuff. A newer approach is to think that scope is fluid, but not fickle, right? There's a difference. So fluid means I'm open to the idea, or the team is, and the team leaders are, to the idea that the scope could change, that we might need to add to it or take away from it, because the reality is the market crashes or we lose team members or whatever reason, but we have to be a little more fluid, not so rigid and freak out, right? It's managed by the project manager or the program manager, in support and partnership with the sponsor and the business owner and the product owners, right? If you're doing agile stuff, Scrum. So be a little fluid, kind of agile, but also have good process ahead of time. So the key is we got to communicate this early and then be willing to communicate it again throughout the project. The second plan element we need to look at, in addition to defining and communicating scope early in the onset, is to have a clear change control process, right? So we don't want to be super rigid, but we got to have something that manages the scope changes. So the old school is we're going to have a change control board, a steering committee reviews it and approves everything based on the scope. Now, that's good if it's big things, right? Like it's going to change the whole course of the project. It's going to add a month. It's going to cost $10,000 more. Some thresholds, right? In those big four, if it's significant impact to the schedule, if it's a lot more money, if it's a savings, good for them to know. If the quality is impacted, then that's something. And you know, so that's what we want to do. We want to have a process. And so old school, it's going to be very rigid. If you're just starting a PMO or a change management process, it should be rigid. It's going to get everybody used to doing something maybe a little more solid than it used to. The new school is scope changes are proposed. We talk about it, right? We approve or deny, maybe ad hoc at the team level or sponsor level, especially if you're owning products. If you have to go to the steering committee ad hoc or every now and then to these typically C-suite folks or leaders, it's going to slow the process and productivity down, or it could if you don't have well-established governance. So we do need a process, but it needs to be fluid, just like life is with these projects, right? And that'll help us keep tabs on scope, control it where we need to, and let it kind of grow or expand and contract where we don't. The third thing is prioritize features and set clear expectations, right? So this really you get into when you do Scrum and user stories and your what's the definition of done, and that's super helpful. And I love this approach, and I'm a new Scrum Master. Have used some of the principles of Agile and Scrum throughout the years, but now we're really digging into it. And so I love this feature, right? So clear expectations from the get-go. The new features, right, shouldn't be added or removed on a whim, or it's too hard, right? We don't want to not do things because it's too hard. Work is hard. So sometimes putting in the extra work is going to make us a little safer or more efficient or in compliance or better regulatory or better product for people out there. So the old school thought, again, we have these guardrails on scope and we can never go outside and we're going to crash through the rails and it's going to ruin the project. And that's a lot of administrative overhead if we can never do that, or we have to follow 10 steps to get an approval. New school, right? Let's talk about it early. Say this is what done looks like. This is the clear expectations of the user, what they want. Then we'll have a backlog like a sprint. We'll go back to it. We'll work on things we can finish. We'll go back and get feedback, right? Waterfall and adaptable, agile, if you will. Waterfall and agile is a great, I think, adaptable approach to the reality of the situation when project teams kick off, when we're working together, when things happen in life, right? You realize that the initial scope we thought was a great idea a year ago or 6 months ago is still going to be part of the core, but we need to change something again because we realize the product can or can't do this, or our team can or can't do this, or it's going to take a lot more work than the sales pitch said it was going to for the product. And that happens, right? So maybe it wasn't accurate enough, or it was too accurate, it was too rigid. So to control, as we put our armor on as program and project managers, this scope monster that is always growing and expanding, it just always is, as much as we want to tighten it down. Consider, one, defining and communicating it clearly from the beginning, knowing that we're going to be a bit agile as needed, but not too fickle, if you will. The second thing is we do have to have change control, right? We have to have some process, whether it's stand-ups talking about it, whether it's the weekly team meeting, more often than that, ad hoc, but don't just wait till between the meetings for that, right? That's not going to be effective. And the third thing is prioritize and set clear expectations. A lot of this boils down to communication, right? Talk about it early. Talk about it throughout. Talk about it while you're doing it. What's work, what's not. Be objective. Be transparent with each other. And you will be able to tame this scope creep monster pretty easily, because sometimes scope does need to grow and sometimes it needs to be less, right? You can realize, oh, we don't need to do half that stuff, and then don't do it and save money and save time for everybody. So thank you all for giving me the time, for watching this video version as well. It's going to be on YouTube for the audio subscribers on Apple, Spotify, whatever platform. Thank you so much. Everybody, please check out hopesnotaplan.org. There's resources, templates, tools, techniques, this episode, other episodes, and you can contact me with questions, episode ideas, or maybe some feedback for me. How's it going? Was this helpful? Was it not? Also, don't forget Fitness Fridays. This past Friday, I talked about the importance of going for you, right? Not being intimidating, starting small, having an accountability buddy. Fitness is a huge part of being successful in the workplace because it helps your mind, it helps your body, and then you can help others when you're doing the work. So thank you for helping me. Again, hopesnotaplan.org. I'm at hopesnotaplan on Instagram and Twitter, or X, whichever we're calling it these days. There's a Facebook page. There's a YouTube channel. Got 700 plus subscribers. Would love you to join me there, where I do 15-second-ish fitness, right? Each day. Most days, from yoga to weightlifting, get some ideas like that, body weight. So if you're leading a program, if you're leading a project, the scope has to be managed, but it shouldn't be too managed, if that makes sense. This is where kind of the science of project management meets the art, right? Where we have to have some scientific controls and how we're going to do this with the art of balancing everybody's needs. And that's what project managers do and program managers. And whether you think you're a project manager or not, if you're leading a family, if you're doing any kind of business at a school or in the fire department or anything, you're going to deal with scope. You're going to deal with the expectations of somebody. They're never going to be perfect, and that's okay. Just do your best. Look at the problem, look at the hope, and then get an actionable plan going. Thanks again. Hopeisnotaplan.org. I'm Kevin Pinnell. I'll see you next time. Stay safe out there. Wash those hands. Godspeed.